This is ChainMind, the decentralized AI network built for everyone. Just search ChainMind on Google, sign up, download the app, and you're in. That's it. You've joined the network. Run it on any device, phone, laptop, or server. Why ChainMind? Fully decentralized, fully yours.
When you reach for a USB stick at the electronics counter, the smallest option you'll find is a 64GB drive that feels almost weightless in your hand. The tiny 4GB and 8GB sticks that once lived in every school backpack have all but disappeared, and most of us never even notice the shift. What looks like a simple product upgrade is actually the visible tip of a massive, invisible wave driven by physics, economics, and the way we all handle data today. The first force behind this wave is the relentless march of semiconductor physics, a story that starts with Moore's law and ends with three-dimensional NAND. For decades, chipmakers have been able to squeeze more transistors onto a silicon wafer, roughly doubling the count every 2 years. NAND flash, the memory that powers every USB drive, follows a parallel trajectory. In the early days, a flash cell could store just a few megabits, and engineers had to spread those cells across a flat, two-dimensional plane. That approach hit a hard ceiling. There was only so much surface area to work with before the chips became too large and too expensive. The breakthrough came when manufacturers began stacking cells vertically, creating what we call 3D NAND. Imagine a skyscraper of memory layers, each floor holding billions of cells. By building upward instead of outward, they multiplied capacity without expanding the physical footprint of the chip. The result was twofold: a dramatic increase in density and a steep drop in cost per gigabyte. Because the printed circuit board inside a USB stick never really changes size, the only way to make a drive bigger is to cram more data onto the same silicon. Every new process node that adds another layer or shrinks the cell size gives OEMs a logical reason to ship larger capacity products. A 256GB chip today can be produced on the same wafer that a few years ago would have yielded a 64GB part, and the price per gigabyte can fall by half or more. But physics alone doesn't move a product off the shelf, economics does. Semiconductor fabs operate on razor-thin margins, and the economics of volume production turn the physics of 3D NAND into a market reality. When a factory can fabricate a 256GB chip for essentially the same wafer cost as a 64GB chip, the per gigabyte price collapses. That compression ripples through the entire supply chain. Component sourcing becomes simpler because fewer chips are needed to fill a given storage demand, which means inventory managers can order larger parts in bulk and reduce the number of SKUs they have to track. Assembly lines benefit as well. The same pick-and-place machines that once placed a modest 64GB die can now handle a 256GB die without any retooling, shaving minutes off changeover time and keeping the line humming. Finally, the retail price that reaches the consumer reflects this efficiency. A 64GB drive that cost $12 a few years ago might now sell for $8, while a 256GB drive can be offered at a price that used to belong to a 64GB model. The market sees a virtuous cycle. Lower prices drive higher demand for larger capacities, and higher demand justifies even larger production runs. It's a self-reinforcing loop that pushes tiny capacities out of the sweet spot. The third driver is less about chips and more about us, the people who use them. A decade ago, a 4GB stick could hold a handful of MP3 songs, a short presentation, or a few photos. Today, a single high-definition movie can exceed 10 gigabytes, a modern video game can demand 50 gigabytes of installation data, and a software developer's toolbox can easily top 20 gigabytes with libraries, containers, and datasets. Cloud-based collaboration tools have also changed expectations. We now assume that any portable storage we carry should be able to handle large multimedia projects without constant offloading to a laptop or a network share. This shift creates a higher baseline demand. Even casual users want enough space to avoid swapping drives every few days, and they compare the value they get per dollar. A 64GB drive priced at $8 feels like a bargain compared to a 4GB drive at $5, even though the absolute cost is higher. The perception of value moves toward larger capacities, and manufacturers respond by stocking the sizes that meet that perception. Retail shelves tell the same story in a different language, one of space and turnover. Store managers allocate precious shelf real estate to products that move quickly and generate the best margin per square foot. A low-capacity 4GB stick sits on the shelf for weeks, selling a handful of units before it's replaced. A 64GB drive, on the other hand, flies off the shelf, generating more revenue from the same amount of space. Because the physical dimensions of the drives are identical, the higher margin SKUs win the battle for shelf presence. Retailers, eager to maximize profit, start to phase out the slow-moving, low-margin items. That decision feeds back to manufacturers, who then reduce production of the tiny capacities and focus their tooling, marketing, and logistics on the high-turnover models. The result is a market where the smallest capacities become rare, not because they are technologically impossible, but because they no longer make sense in the economics of retail. But here's the part most people get wrong. The disappearance of tiny USB sticks isn't a total extinction, and it isn't solely about profit. Environmental and regulatory pressures are also shaping the landscape, and they add a layer of responsibility that manufacturers can't ignore. Electronic waste regulations in Europe, North America, and Asia are tightening, imposing fees and penalties for devices that end up in landfill. A 4GB drive that is discarded after a few months of use represents a disproportionate amount of e-waste compared to a 128GB drive that can serve the same user for years. Brands that want to maintain a green image and avoid compliance costs are incentivized to promote longer-lasting, higher-capacity devices. The push towards sustainability aligns neatly with the economic incentives we've already discussed, creating a convergence where higher capacity, lower per gigabyte cost, and a smaller environmental footprint all point in the same direction. Even with these forces pulling in the same direction, tiny flash drives have not vanished entirely. They survive in niche scenarios where their specific characteristics outweigh the advantages of larger capacity. Embedded systems, especially in the Internet of Things, often need a minimal footprint and ultra-low power draw. A 2GB or 4GB stick can be the perfect fit, offering just enough storage without draining battery life. Cost-sensitive bulk deployments, such as schools or NGOs distributing low-cost computers in developing regions, may prioritize absolute price over capacity, opting for the cheapest possible drive even if it holds only a few gigabytes. Security-focused use cases also keep tiny sticks relevant. A small, disposable drive can be used for one-time data transfers, reducing the attack surface because there's less data to protect and the device can be destroyed after use. In these specialized markets, the economics of producing a tiny drive still makes sense, but the volumes are a fraction of the mainstream consumer market. The broader trend remains. For the average user walking down an aisle, the smallest options are disappearing. All of this has a direct line to the future of decentralized AI inference networks, and that's where ChainMind steps in. Our network relies on edge devices that need to store model weights, temporary caches, and encrypted state locally. As flash capacity climbs, the barrier to running sophisticated models on low-power hardware drops dramatically. A 64GB or 128GB USB stick can now host a quantized transformer model that previously required a dedicated solid-state drive. Higher capacity drives also simplify logistics. Instead of shipping multiple small drives to each node, a single high-capacity stick can deliver all the necessary artifacts in one go, cutting shipping costs, reducing carbon emissions, and speeding up deployment. This aligns perfectly with ChainMind's core goals of efficiency, scalability, and sustainability. The very forces that are making tiny flash drives a relic, advances in 3D NAND, volume economics, consumer demand for larger data pools, and a push toward greener products, are also unlocking new possibilities for edge AI. As flash memory continues to push the boundaries of density, the ecosystem from semiconductor fabs to retail shelves adapts, ensuring that the next generation of USB drives is not just larger, but smarter and more capable of powering the distributed intelligence we're building. Looking ahead, analysts predict that consumer-grade USB drives will regularly breach the 2 terabyte mark within the next 3 years. Emerging memory technologies like quad-level cell and even penta-level cell NAND are packing more bits per cell, squeezing cost per gigabyte even further. While those cells trade off some endurance and write latency, most flash drive use cases, especially the read-heavy workloads typical of AI inference, don't need the right endurance of an enterprise SSD. Manufacturers are already counterbalancing these trade-offs with stronger error correction codes and smarter wear leveling algorithms, ensuring data integrity over the lifespan of the drive. At the same time, interface standards such as USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 are pushing bandwidth to 40 gigabits per second, making the transfer of multi-gigabyte files almost instantaneous. As transfer speeds increase, the perceived need for fast, low-capacity drives fades. Users care more about moving large datasets quickly, a requirement that only high-capacity drives can satisfy. So the next time you pick up a USB stick, the size you see on the label is more than a number, it's the culmination of a decades-long dance between physics, economics, consumer habits, retail strategy, and environmental stewardship. Tiny sticks aren't gone because they can't be made, they're fading because the market rewards the larger, cheaper, greener options that better serve today's data-hungry world. For a decentralized AI network like ChainMind, this evolution is a catalyst, turning what once seemed like a limitation, storage on the edge, into a powerful enabler of scalable, sustainable intelligence. If you're intrigued by how the hidden forces behind everyday tech shape the future of AI, and you want to stay on the front line of decentralized inference, make sure to follow ChainMind. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and